All right, our next speaker is our keynote speaker. He is an internationally respected boxing historian and author. He began interest in boxing at the age of 14, about the same time he started taking boxing lessons at the fabled Stillman's Gym in Manhattan. He trained alongside many stars of the golden age of televised boxing, and it was at Stillman's that he acquired a profound respect for what it takes to achieve success in what he called the toughest sport of all. Will you please welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Mike Silver.
Just don't ring a bell again. Everybody's going to get up and start fighting. Okay. I must say, this is quite an honor that Steve has bestowed upon me to address this audience with real gladiators who, as Teddy Roosevelt said, met that test, and they're here now. So this is something very special for me, and I thank you, Steve, for giving me this opportunity. As was noted, I am a boxing writer, historian. I've just finished my 4th book on boxing, and I didn't know what else to write. So my 4th book is basically how to make the sport less dangerous. That's it. Yeah. Thank you. The title of the book, by the way, is When in Doubt, Stop the Bout. When in doubt, stop the bout. It'll be available I might as well put in a plug, October 29th, available for pre-order. As a boxing historian, I take very seriously the sport's rich and colorful history, a history that no other sport even comes close to matching. It is every Hall of Fame's responsibility to honor, celebrate, and preserve that history. As I'm sure you know, boxing is a very ancient sport. In 1887, while digging for the foundation for an apartment building in Rome, Italy, workers discovered a huge intact bronze statue of a boxer. It's about 7 feet tall, buried under 10 feet of earth. Many years later, scientists using carbon dating estimated the age of the statue as 2,000 years old. I've placed a photo of that statue on every table. So if you've seen it and were wondering what that was, that's what it is. The sculptor depicted the fighter's hands wrapped in strips of leather. This is the ancient boxing glove known as a cestus. Now, we don't know the name of the artist who did this masterpiece. We don't even know the name of the boxer. Perhaps he fought in the great Colosseum of Rome. Studying his face, he was obviously a veteran of many contests. He sported a cauliflower ear, broken nose, and scar tissue crossing his brow. The artist even added flecks of red paint around the lips to stimulate blood. Perhaps this statue adorns space in some ancient boxing hall of fame. We don't know. But what we do know is that the unidentified gladiator, and I call you all gladiators, represented here is a kindred spirit to every fighter in this room and every fighter before them who ever took that long walk from the dressing room up the 4 steps into that ring, and that includes amateur and professional boxers. I only did it 3 times, but I got a taste of it. Because no matter if you're a legendary world champion or an uncrowned champion or just a 4 or 6 round preliminary fighter, you all belong to that same special fraternity. You share the same thoughts and feelings as that ancient Roman or Greek boxer depicted in that statue. No athlete risks more than the professional boxer. No athlete sacrifices more than the professional boxer. And no athlete has to overcome more obstacles both in and out of the ring to reach the top of his profession. To quote a well-known member of the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame, the great Angelo Dundee, quote, "There is no greater athlete than a fighter. Fighters are special. To be a fighter, you have to be special. Forget about being a world champion. Just to get in that ring, you've got to be special. You've got to be a talented individual." End quote. Rome, where this statue was found and where it currently resides in that country's National Museum. By the way, about 7 years ago, it was delivered to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where I saw it and just was fascinated by it. It truly is a masterpiece. Well, if Rome is the eternal city, then boxing is certainly the eternal sport. In fact, the first account of a boxing match in literature appears in Homer's Iliad, an epic poem written almost 3,000 years ago. The other day, in anticipation of my speech, I picked up an old Ring magazine, which I often do, and this was dated February 1929. I turned to the page that covered the Florida boxing results and discovered reports on professional bouts that took place in Miami, Jacksonville, Orlando, West Palm Beach, Pensacola, Sarasota, Tampa, and St. Petersburg. That was just for 1 month. I then looked at an issue of The Ring from February 1948, 19 years later, and went to the section called Under Southern Skies, written by Tom Efron. Steve, right, you might remember that in the Ring magazine. Now, for many years, Tom covered the fights in the South for Ring, and he reported bouts, this is 1948, in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa, Orlando, Sarasota, and Coral Gables. So Florida, as we can see, has had a very rich boxing history. In those days, from the 1920s to the 1950s, you could find boxing results in almost every city in America. For more than half a century, boxing was a staple of the entertainment industry and actually rivaled baseball in popularity. In fact, for much of the 20th century, boxing was an integral part of the fabric of our popular culture and the only true international sport. The greatest and richest title in all of sports was the heavyweight championship of the world. And everyone, from school kids to housewives, is that still okay to say, housewives? I'm not sure, okay, but you know what I mean. To Nobel Prize winners, everyone knew the name of the heavyweight champion of the world. The Florida Boxing Hall of Fame appropriately does not limit itself to honoring just the most famous champions and contenders of the past. It also recognizes those reliable and talented fringe contenders, the gatekeepers, journeymen, and club fighters, all of whom contributed to the history of the sport and to the education of future world champions. For without them, there would be no sport. In the early 1970s, I met and became friends with a trainer in New York's Gleason's gym. His name was Snooks Howard. Snooks was obviously a nickname. It's not his given name. He was an ex-fighter who turned pro in South Carolina in 1946, and 2 years later moved to Florida, where he had an additional 82 professional fights. In 7 years, Snooks had a total of 114 fights as a lightweight and welterweight. That is approximately 16 fights per year. His final stats were 64 wins, 42 losses, and 10 draws, mostly made up of 6 and 8 round fights and about a dozen 10-rounders. You can find his record on BoxRec. Now, that record doesn't sound very impressive, but it has to be looked at in context. Snooks fought in a different era when Florida had about 10 arenas operating on a weekly schedule. He fought at least 2 or 3 times a month, and sometimes as many as 4 times a month. There are few recognizable names on his record, but all of his bouts were against legitimate pros like himself. Promoters relied on people such as Snooks Howard to always be available, especially on short notice, to fill in for cancellations. Most of these fighters knew they would never be a world champion or rated contender. They fought just to earn a living, like a plumber who goes to work every day. Boxing was their job. They fought when ill or when cuts hadn't fully healed, and sometimes they beat some pretty good fighters. Now, they should not be confused with what's known as tomato cans or professional losers. These men knew how to box, and they knew how to survive. Does someone like Snooks Howard deserve to be in the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame? Absolutely. One of the things that has always interested me about boxing history is its ability to transcend the world of sports. No other sport can make that claim. The careers of such legendary boxers as John L. Sullivan, Jack Johnson, Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis, and Muhammad Ali have impacted and addressed social issues that involve history, ideology, politics, violence, gender, and race. From Homer to Hemingway, and from Socrates to Stallone, boxing has attracted and inspired a diverse range of artists, authors, sculptors, playwrights, and poets for over 3,000 years. Did you know that from the 1890s to the present, over 500 boxing-themed films have been produced, both in Hollywood and abroad? Now, that is more than twice as many films as all other sports films combined. The reasons are not hard to fathom. No other sport can match boxing's drama and romance, its colorful personalities, and the depth and richness of its historical record. Is it any wonder that it has produced such a huge volume of art, literature, film, and photography? Okay. Just one second. Give me a second here. I thought I left out the last page of my speech. One second. In light of that rich history, every Hall of Fame carries with it a responsibility to both honor and educate for present and future generations, especially now when our culture seems to be overrun with flash over substance. Years ago, I was interested in managing a professional boxer. I applied with the New York State Athletic Commission to get a license to manage a boxer. In reading the contract that he and I had to sign, I saw a sentence that has stayed with me ever since. And I don't think any other contract between a performer and a manager contains this particular sentence. It reads, quote, "The manager recognizes the unique quality of the athlete," end quote. We all know that boxers as athletes stand out from the crowd, and as noted by Angelo Dundee, are special. That is why I am so very grateful that people with character and a caring nature are in charge of the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame. Every person who cares about this sport owes a debt of gratitude to Steve Canton and his dedicated board of directors for taking on this responsibility. Steve's interest in boxing and the Florida Hall of Fame is motivated solely by his love for the sport, and I am supremely pleased that it is in his capable fists. Just like when he was a champion boxer in the Air Force, Steve is keeping up the good fight, and boxing can always use more people like him. The sport certainly has enough of the other kind. So thank you, Steve, for your friendship, your guidance, inspiration, hard work, and initiative, and for making this wonderful weekend possible. And thank you all for hearing this. Thank you.